So I've been asked to talk about practices. So tonight I'm going to talk about practices. Before I do so, however, I want to touch on something that is perhaps counterintuitive, but is really of the essence in all this. Orientation is delusion. Confusion is the truth. You cannot ever know what's going on. You cannot ever know where you are. You cannot ever know what's happening. It's always open-ended question marks. Whenever there's an orientation where things seem to be a certain way, that's a red flag that, wait a minute, I'm supplying this. I'm creating a version of things, and then I'm buying into it. I bought my own bill of goods. So confusion is the true state. The true state is confusion, which is rather counterintuitive in terms of consensus reality, where you're supposed to have a clue. You're supposed to, know what's going on. You're supposed to. But in actuality, that is the problem, not the solution. And effective practice of the yoga will remedy that. So if you're not confused yet, with any luck, you will be soon. Now, in terms of practices, there's a bunch of practices, and the essence of practice of this yoga is to explore your experience and notice the ways in which it is different than you're used to holding it to be. Just as an overarching principle. Another thing I can say about the practice of this yoga works very intrinsically. It works sort of under the table. So it's very powerful, but you don't necessarily notice that anything's happening. So the trick is to just groove on it, just play with it, and don't have any expectations. Just do it, and you'll be very surprised before long when things start shifting for you. But it's not necessarily self-evident at the time that that's in the cards, because again, the way this works is what's the word? There's a nice word for that. Anyway, not important. I'm losing my use of language. One day I'm going to come out here and go, I'm kind of doing that now, aren't I? Okay, exercises, practices. So here's a wonderful practice. And the point of this practice is, typically we're very used to looking at the conditions that we're looking at. So, you might be used to looking at this room and all the people here and the chairs and the carpet and all the stuff around. But what you're actually looking at is your experience. But typically we don't notice that we're looking at experience. We think we're looking at the stuff. We bypass the experience. So experience, in a certain sense, is like a perfectly clear window that you're looking through. Or a better image is a perfectly clear TV screen on which all sorts of images are appearing. But we go to the images typically. We ignore the TV, and to the point where we don't even know it's there. Now this is a very simple exercise and it's fun, but it's subtle. All the exercises, all the practices in this area are subtle. You have to play with them to learn how to do them. And they're not mechanical or mechanistic or simple, where you just do this or move that way or say this or something like that. So you notice I pulled back the curtains. So this practice, try this. So just relaxedly look outside the window at something that's out there, and don't try not to have your eyes move around. Just sort of don't force it or hold it or be stiff, but just gaze steadily at a spot and just feel the whole, like maybe you're looking at the bushes, just sort of feel the whole bush. And then without shifting your eyes, become aware of the glass. Don't shift your eyes, don't look away, look right where you were looking. And then shift again. Now become aware of the bush again where you were looking. Without shifting your eyes. And then switch it again, then become aware of the glass. And you can sort of flip that around a bunch of times just to get a feel for it. And notice what the bushes are like when you're aware of the grass. They have a little different flavor than when you're orienting to the bushes themselves. And okay, so that's practice one. You just experiment with that. And again, don't have high expectations that anything's going to happen. But this is profound. And of course, another variation of this same practice is watch a TV show. And just watch it the way you usually do, where you're paying attention to the show, a movie, whatever. And then shift again and be aware of the TV or a computer if you're watching on your computer screen, say. And then shift again and orient to the show, and then you're with the show and the characters and what's happening. Then shift again to the screen with images appearing on it. And do that same thing. You're training yourself to notice the difference between the medium and the objects that you're thinking of yourself, you feel like you're focusing on. Because what's really here is experience. There's no objects here. But of course, ordinarily we completely ignore experience. Experience is just a given, it's just transparent. It's not even, well, sure, I'm experiencing theoretically, but really it's about the stuff. But that's not true. In actuality, the only thing that's here is experience itself. And the objects appear in it very strangely. When you become aware, and when you become more aware of the experience, then the way the objects are becomes more clear. Because in that context, the objects aren't being held so rigidly as objectively existing, and you begin to notice their ghostly nature and the way that they come and go and are dynamic and drift in and out and morph and so on and so forth. So this is a training in noticing the medium rather than the objects that you're maybe used to focusing on or orienting to. Any questions about that? Does that seem clear enough? And you can play with it with movies, you can play with it with TV, you can play with it with, windows, and then ultimately you play with it with experience itself. And then wherever you are, it's like, okay, I'm looking at this room, I'm looking at it while I'm talking to you, and okay, now I'm looking at my experience. You haven't gone anywhere, but you're just images showing up in that. And then you can switch it back. And it's very interesting when this happens. It's very interesting to play with this. It's a subtle thing. But again, it has a potency that will surprise you in the long run.
As I'm hearing you, Peter, I'm hearing you say that appearances in our mind, there's really no separation.
Yes.
So this practice has guided us into having deeper confidence in that knowing.
Yeah, but it reveals it directly and by contact, by irrationally, just by texture, by immediate, engagement, rather than by any kind of a reasoning or logic or even understanding. It's more visceral than that. I mean, visceral is the wrong word, but the way we usually mean visceral, it's like a feeling tone that reveals itself rather than something that you arrive at through any kind of process or even insight. It's like riding a bike. You learn to ride a bike by doing it, and then when you know how to do it, you know what it's supposed to feel like. And once you know what it's supposed to feel like, then you can ride a bike. You just get on a bike until it feels like you're riding it, and then lo and behold, you are. Right? You don't know how. It's not like anyone ever explained to you what to do. You're not saying to yourself, well, let's say I have to move my hands a little. I have to put, It's not like that. You feel it. You feel it as a whole, as a gestalt. And once you know that feeling, then you know what's up with it. You know how to do it. This is the same thing. So you come to the point of this by feeling what it is, and you hit that feeling by these kinds of tricks and exercises, where you deliberately expose yourself to this shift of perspective until you can feel what it is, and then you're less stuck in or not stuck in perspectives, and it greatly increases your mobility. And it also reveals very clearly that the objectification, the concretization of objects and entities and things is just a perspective. So another exercise, another practice. Let's see. This one's is a very simple one. It's kind of fun for all you troopers out there, or in here. So what you do for this one you do it's easiest to do probably with your visual field, but ultimately you can do it with any of your sense fields or any experiential dimension at all. So you find something to look at that's relatively uniform. You can look at a blank wall with nothing on it. You know, I can look at my naked thigh here, or you can look at a piece of paper, or anything that's relatively nondescript. It's not too important, you know. And the way you do this is, you can do it with a clear sky. This is a variation of Torville technique, although it doesn't have the impact that Torville does at this stage. So you gaze at it, just steadily. Now, the important thing with this practice, with this exercise, is don't let your eyes shift. Gaze very steadily. Now, don't tighten up, don't stiffen up, just sort of relax and let your eyes just sort of like be at a point. And forget what you're looking at, just look. And watch what happens, watch what you see. You'll begin to notice a dynamism. You'll begin to notice a liveliness. You begin to notice patterns and shapes emerging. It's subtle. I mean, again, this is a matter of feeling what it's like, learning what that quality and dimension feels like just by experiencing it, not by getting a handle on it or anything. And you relax, don't tighten up, don't force it. You just steadily gaze. And again, what makes it work is don't let your eyes shift. Ordinarily, with the visual field, when we're looking at things, the eyes are dancing around. When you look at someone's face, you don't actually look at their face. You sort of look there and there and there, and the eyes spontaneously are moving around always. And this paradoxically, all that motion creates a sense of stability, whereas the texture of experience itself is not stable. But it's harder to notice when the perceptual mechanism is being distracted by all this movement. So by this simple exercise, you'll discover what perception really looks like without the extra distraction of all this jumping around. And you will be surprised. And again, the point of this is not that there's any great shakes in that experience. The point of it is you're sensitizing yourself to noticing a quality that is intrinsic in all experiencing. Experience itself is intrinsically dynamic, intrinsically unstable. It's continually morphing and dancing and moving. And it's explicit. It's not just that theoretically, it actually is that. And this exercise displays that with great clarity. And it's very easy to do. It's kind of fun after a while. You'll feel like someone dosed you with acid, or you're watching a movie or something. You'll just be woo, off and running. It's good to a useful addition to this technique is to be in a fairly bright light, not like glaring or uncomfortable, but a good illumination. That helps the process. One thing that I do sometimes, or I have experimented with, is they make an application for an iPad or an iPhone, or a smartphone that turns the whole screen into a white light. So the whole screen turns white with no detail in it. And that's ideal for this exercise. You just make it, I don't know, I'm not going to bother to demonstrate because I don't think I would see it. Because you have to have it close enough to really, if I do it from across the room, it kind of doesn't get the full effect. But you look at that, and just, again, don't let the eyes shift. Just relax, be with it steadily, and you will be very surprised at what that's like. Any questions about that technique?
It kind of worked. That's kind of the thing behind this sort of sitting still too, is that all the other stuff starts coming to the dynamism starts coming to the surface.
Yeah, you're sensitizing yourself to a mode that is true across the board in all experience. And when you increase your sensitivity to it, that it actually is like that, then you know where to look. Just like the previous exercise, you're increasing your sensitivity to a shift of perspective between medium and projected object, and you're training yourself in being able to feel the difference with that.
Briefly explain Togel. I know you've done it before, but I lost my distance.
Togel is supposedly the most advanced practice in Dzogchen. And basically, it's what I just talked about in terms of the technique. They have different editions in terms of certain ways you're supposed to hold your body and hold your energy and so on and so forth. But in essence, those are just auxiliaries. And the basic principle is just like that. But Togel, typically you gaze into a clear sky with that, steadily without shifting your eyes. And again, if you're doing it properly, you've had the initiations and you've had the training and you know the postures and so on. So you're supposed to hold your breath so your lips are not quite closed and not quite open. Your teeth are not quite touching. And then the breath comes in and out of the mouth very smoothly and slowly. But those aren't essential to the project, to the practice. That's sort of aids that can, sort of lubricate the thing along. And the point of Togel is well, let me, it's an overview. This is sort of getting theoretical, but that's fine. There's basically two practices within Dzogchen, Trecho and Togel. Trecho is seeing the emptiness, I think. The first practice we talked about with the window leads to Trecho very directly. Togel is a practice where rather than merely seeing the emptiness of things and objects, you experience the liveliness, the dynamism, the energy of the radiance. And again, it's essentially a sensitivity training. And then you discover that the entirety of experience, the entirety of reality, is basically flashing lights that aren't really there. And you come to see that directly, again, by training yourself in a prolonged sensitization training, which is what Togel is.
How do you spell those?
Well, they're Tibetan. The English spelling is a transliteration, so there's several different ways of spelling it. Tibetan is a bizarre language, and I remember.
But anyone.
Okay, Togel is often spelled Thogal. It's often spelled Thodgal. It's sometimes spelled Togel. So it's just phoneticized. I mean,
Yeah, that's why.
And I don't know the correct way to pronounce it either. I mean, God knows a real Tibetan would pay me for a rube by hearing the way I talk it. But I don't, obviously the words are not important. The words aren't the point of the thing. But all of this, again, is, what I'm presenting is essentially Dzogchen out of context. Dzogchen is stripped down. Pardon me. told them never to phone me. What I'm presenting is basically Dzogchen stripped down. Dzogchen without the Dzogchen. Which is essentially coming to see directly what is actually here. And especially that it is not what you think it is. There is no world here. There is no objectivity here. There is nothing but a supreme transcendental principle which alone exists, which you are, which everything is, and which exists transcendentally, independently, dependent on nothing. It creates itself. It's entirely miraculous. And this is literally true. And Dzogchen is a Tibetan, an elaborate, more or less elaborate Tibetan technique of coming to see that. And what I present is a made-up gobbledygook way of coming to see the same thing.
Can you help go look at Tibetan style? The day of the session, it's just full of all kinds of things. It's hard to find access points.
It is, it's very hard. And Tibetan teachings are further garbled because, especially Dzogchen teachings, a great deal of modern Dzogchen is more or less heavily tainted with a tantric point of view. And the entire spirit of Tantra is alien to Dzogchen. The principle of Tantra is development and purification. The principle of Dzogchen is seeing what is already the case. So in Dzogchen, there's zero development, there's zero purification. Whereas in Tantra, it's all about development and purification. But Tantra is the dominant sort of mindset of Tibetan Buddhism. And as a result, it's sort of a brush that has tainted everything else that's presented. So a lot of Dzogchen is presented as if it was Tantric, which is confusing as hell if we're trying to see what it really is. Okay, practices. Let's see, let's come up with another practice here. I thought if I heard one earlier. Well, something will come to me. I promise I'll come up with another one this evening. So to go back to where I started this evening, confusion is the true flavor of reality. Nothing makes any sense. Nothing is anywhere. Nothing has an up or a down or an in or an out or a here or there. It's all just weird beyond weird. It's all completely, I can't say because it is that way. If we could say what it was, then there would be an orientation. And so, in essence, all of this yoga is about freeing yourself of the poison of imaginary orientation. And all orientation is imaginary because in actuality there's nothing to orient to. So it has to be imagined into existence in order to orient to it. And again, the dream analogy is a lovely and very clear illustration of this. In a dream, there's nothing. There's just weird energies and patterns and who knows what. It's confusing as hell. But then, at some point, the consciousness seizes upon a pattern and begins free associating a narrative, free associating a story. And I'm walking down a path, and oh look, there's a ship coming down out of the sky, and I'm going to get on and go sailing. And oh look, and all of a sudden you're off and running, doing whatever it is that the dream seems to be about. And all of that is imagined, is essentially free associated or projected onto the seething, incoherent rawness of the actual sleep state. And going lucid in a dream, of course, those of you who experience this, reveals that. It doesn't necessarily destroy the projection, but you see clearly the arbitrariness of it. You see, oh, no, it's not really like that. You know, it could be like anything else or like nothing, because it's not really there. It's just a game. This free association, this structuralizing it, is a game that the consciousness is playing by imagining it into existence. It's like looking at clouds and imagining, you know, oh, there's a lion and there's a car and, you know, there's an orange and there's a, you know, whatever. It's just a cloud. There's nothing there, but the consciousness can effortlessly project it as being this or that. And this is how seeming orientations can arise within something which is intrinsically disoriented, something which is intrinsically chaotic.
Peter, do you think that there's a way, though, that it just occurs to me without orientation, that I think it's fair to say that what's being oriented to is the radiance, in the sense that the experiential qualities, and I mean that's what seems to more captivated by that in a certain sense.
Well, always. I mean, there's nothing other than radiance to orient to. But the problem with orientations is the radiance is being held to be this way or that way, and in actuality, intrinsically, the radiance is ambiguous. It's not any particular way.
But it appears, not as well in my experience, it appears as being a certain way.
But that wayness is being imposed by consciousness. I mean, it's not being done deliberately,
right?
You know, but it's being done by, you know, what might be called karma, the karma of the proclivities of the system the consciousness system that you are.
So if you take two like distinct experiential flavors, like sadness and joy, right? Mm-hmm. So we orient to those in such a way that we develop language to represent those in some sense and differentiate those textures, right? So, and to me, I mean, my experience of it is that there's kind of, it's paradoxical, that there's something distinctive present that allows me to make that distinction between those two flavors. That's an actual distinction. Otherwise, I couldn't make the distinction. And yet, when I go to find specifically what it is, it absolutely can't be that.
Right. There seems to be a basis for a distinction, right. But that very seeming is a projection. Or let's say it's a better way to put it rather than a projection is a biased partiality. It's seeing it in a censored way. When radiance is experienced in naked radiance, it is absolutely ambiguous. It's a million flavors all at once. And yet, of these million flavors, there may be seeming dominances. But the dominances exist in a context of complete otherness that is also very present.
So we're focusing on the dominant sort of.
It's a censorship, yeah, it's a censorship. It's like everything, the quality of anything is like a bell curve. And typically, when people look at an experience and get a handle on what it is, the bell curve is being censored, the bell curve of quality is being censored, and the peak is being seen. And like, okay, that's what it is. But that's very heavily censorious, because all of the rest of the bell curve that's not at the peak, and that in fact differs in value from the peak, is being ignored. It's being essentially denied. It's being swept under the carpet. But it's actually there. And so all of this remedial yoga is basically sensitivity training to become more aware of farther down the bell curve and ultimately the whole bell curve. And the interesting thing about these bell curves is that they include everything. So when you look at anything, you look at this, you're looking, so at the top of the bell curve, oh, this looks like a cheap plastic glass half full of water, you know? But if you look at the bell curve of what's really here, you find the totality of reality. Because the bell curve goes out and never stops. Not just, I mean, not in a trivial sense, in a sense of the actual presence of those qualities.
So our capacity to seemingly characterize and differentiate different flavors of or spiritual qualities, phenomena. This is not that. Rests upon overlooking all the ways in which
Yes.
it cannot be characterized.
Exactly so. Exactly so. An unfathomable, incoherent fullness is partialized into a pseudo-coherence.
That process just seems like this happens just
Oh, yeah.
unwitting.
Yeah. Consciousness.
The entire world of apparent differentiation
Yeah.
is presto.
Yeah. Yeah. The inherent intelligence, which of course is what's doing that, because it does everything, is inconceivably powerful. And not only is it doing it, but it's doing it in real time, improvisationally. You know, backwards in high heels, you know. And I mean, this is really the essential principle of yoga and the essential principle of liberation from karma. So karma is looking at the peaks of the bell curve, and all of a sudden there's all of this structure, there's all this situation, there's all these relationships, and they're all perceivable and differentiable and more or less definable, and so on and so forth, which is your normal life, let's say, typically. And yoga is a sensitivity training to notice that the peaks of all these bell curves actually come with all of this annoying noise in the system of the slopes of the bell curve, all of which deviate from the peak, but are also there and are actually included. The peak isn't a separate entity. The peak is, it's like if you stand on the beach and watch the waves rolling in, when you look at any wave, you're actually looking at the whole ocean. There's no point where the wave stops and the ocean starts.
Right, from that vantage, there are no waves.
There are no waves, or there is nothing but ocean.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's not a matter of denying the waves, but it's pointing about that the waves don't exist autonomously and are not actually differentiable. Saying this wave, that wave, and the other wave is omitting the enormous fact that these waves are all fundamentally expressions of a unified fullness that in no way are separate from each other. In fact, if you follow the water in between them and the trough between the waves, they're continuous. So it's a wave system. You know, this wave, that wave, the other wave, and that wave are actually, rather than being four waves, are one system of waves. And that one system of waves is actually not a system of waves, but is actually the ocean. And the ocean is not actually the ocean, but is the physical, gravitational balance point of the solar system. I mean, whatever, right? But it goes out and it never stops. Endless inclusion. And the all this partialization has to be forced into the situation. It doesn't actually exist. I mean, it doesn't actually take that much effort because all you have to do is imagine it, and lo and behold, there it is. But still in all, that's a kind of a forcing, because it's not really like that.
But it is amazing that there is this radiance that, even the notion of like these bell-shaped curves, I love that image of kind of this experience of sadness. It has a sort of dominant kind of sense to it. But that ability to recognize it as distinct from something else rests upon, right? Not noticing what's not dominant about it, in a sense, right?
Yeah.
But it is curious to me that we experience this life as there is a kind of richness, from my vantage, a kind of richness at the same time in these different flavors. Like,
Sure.
So in other words, it's like to only see, it's almost like there's something beautiful about not merely seeing the infinity of it, but also seeing. Does that make sense? It's like
No, I understand what you're saying, and I know what you mean, but there's a fallacy in that in the bell curve, the peak is not erased or canceled and negated. The peak is still the peak.
Right.
So there's still a poignancy and a beauty and a richness in that dominant quality.
Right. It doesn't-
But it's not diminished or negated or canceled out by the rest of the bell curve. On the contrary, it's augmented.
Right.
So it's actually more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is one of the interesting aspects of progress in yoga as one develops these various degrees of realization, that one's previous perspectives are not negated or canceled out. They're in fact augmented.
Yeah.
Because the previous, in terms of this analogy, the previous normalcy frames of reference are maybe the peaks. And then as one becomes more sensitive to farther down the bell curve, that the peaks version still persists. It's still obvious. But then there's more. It's added to rather than replacing. And nothing is negated. When you see that things are not what you thought they were, they're not negated. They're augmented. They're not what you thought they were. They're more. Interpretation is always diminishing. So when you think you know what something is, you're making it less than it actually is. Because what it actually is more than that. So this kind of sensitivity, this kind of noticing what's really here, is not a negating or a diminishing or a losing of anything. On the contrary, it's an expansion. Just an infinite inclusion and inclusion of the values and the richness of it all.
So if you take his example of sadness, you say there's more than sadness.
Yes. If you look at sadness, you'll notice, like not in the abstract, but if you're feeling sad, look at the real presence of that experience, that flavor. And if you just feel that, oh, I'm sad, you're just sort of simplifying it in a way, or you're labeling it or holding it as sadness. But if you look at what's actually present, there's a lusciousness and a richness there that has all sorts of, it's like tasting a really complex stew. You may taste and you say, oh boy, this is salty. And you're tasting the dot and say it's salt, a lot of salt. But there's all sorts of other flavors that are there. And they're there too. And everything, in your example in terms of emotion, this is particularly easy to notice. When you look, emotion is complex and rich. There's so much there. And it's internally contradictory. Not simple. And all of these flavors that are findable in the actual presence of what emotion is, expand it, they make it rich, they spread it out. And so sadness turns out, yeah, sure, sadness is sadness, but it's more. And then there's all these other flavors and subnotes and qualities in it. They're even very contradictory. There may be great joy, there may be anger, there may be all kinds of things. And then if you look at those subnotes, they also spread out. And so anything you find is more than it's more than your contact point with. And this is the pattern of yoga, is a contact point that opens, always. So you look at something, you're with something, and if you're with it without presupposition, if you're with it without holding it to be this or that, if you're with it just openly, it will open and reveal more of itself. And this is the mechanism of yoga. In the broadest possible terms, contact any contact point with any presence within your experience and let it open, which it will. Not that it's not, let it is not a good way to put it. You don't need to, it does it on its own. Notice that it opens. It's kind of like the exercise with the gazing, looking at a paper. You look at the paper and it starts, you're just looking at the paper, but in a minute, all of a sudden it opens and it's more than that. You're seeing more. And that moreness opens into still more. And that moreness opens into still more. Never-ending openings. And this is, any and every experience is this. And the whole point is to let yourself notice this, to let yourself experience this directly. And the discovery of this quality of intrinsic self-augmentation, to coin a phrase, of experiential qualities, it invalidates all of the rigidities in the simplified interpreted ways that we're in the habit of holding our experience to be. And so it liberates, it broadens the palette, it broadens the spectrum, and all of a sudden, what you thought was going on, sure, that's there, but there's so much more that's also going on, much of which is completely contradictory and contrary in other dimensions and everything to your starting point. And experience goes there by itself. So the simplest yoga instruction is be with anything and let it show you what it is. Because any experience continually opens and reveals its nature.
Yeah, I found that I can't, of course, none of that can be manufactured, but that I have to, it's not fighting against what I think it is. It's not like saying, oh, that's a plastic glass, and then I have to fight against looking at it just a little closer and become something else. It's more like I have to suspend that.
Well, this is where there's an augmentation. There's an auxiliary aid that you can bring to the battle when in that kind of a context, which is more another, which is context. So suppose I'm looking at the paper, and I think, oh, I'm just looking at this stupid napkin. What's the big deal? So that happens. What do I do? Well, then there's this thought. I'm looking at the napkin. I look at that thought, and that thought exists in the context which is not the thought. So even as I'm having the thought, it's just a stupid napkin, I'm also seeing what is more than that. If you do the exercise, even if you're thinking it's a dumb exercise and I'm just looking at a stupid napkin and God, what's this idiot telling me to do? Is he nuts? Even as that's happening, you're still actually looking at the goddamn light that is showing up there, and it will do its tricks. It will reveal itself, because reality does not collapse down to what you're thinking about it. And even if you're actively thinking about it, at the same time, it's busy being what it is, which will diverge from the thought version of it. So you don't need to battle the thought, just bypass it. It's kind of an image that comes to me that seems meaningful as bullfighting. The bullfighter, the matador, doesn't need to outrun the bull. All he does is step out of the way, and the bull goes sweeping by. So this big train of thought and emotion and anger and argument merges up, and so there's the charging bull. You don't need to disarm it or outrun it or anything. All you need to do is just step aside. And then, so there's all that thought, and you don't need to stop it, just let it go. And meanwhile, there's the presence of the light, which is the experiment.
So just see it as a bunch of bull.
Yeah.
And don't trip on your key. In the context of interpretation, I feel like that I notice habitually that I like this, I don't like that, getting into the acceptance and rejection of what's coming in.
Right.
And what you're saying is really, there's no acceptance and no rejection. Then you really abide, really relax in what the presence has to offer you.
Yes. Interpretation is not the enemy that needs to be fought. Preference, attraction and aversion are not the enemies that need to be fought. They are more than they seem to be, and they're unimportant in themselves. So again, you look at the context within which all of that occurs, and it's more than that. The context within which all of that occurs is reality itself, which is completely beyond that intrinsically. So again, it's like I was saying to Stan, it's like it's the bullfighter thing again. So there's all this, I'm interpreting and I'm liking this and I'm not liking that and I'm all caught up in my stuff. So okay, cool, that's happening. But you just sort of sidestep it over here, and what's there? There's always infinite dimensions going on explicitly in experience. And just because we're used to partializing and pretending we're paying attention to one thing or another, it still is the case that that's so. And so again, a large part of yoga is sensitivity training to notice these, sort of peripheral dimensions where the issues that we're grappling with in our point of focus are just not relevant. So it's not a matter, like interpretive frameworks, it's not a matter of stopping interpreting or training yourself to not do it. It's a matter of noticing that the whole structure and energy and action of interpreting is a small event in a vastness, in a vast system, most of which is utterly beyond that, and all of which is present concurrently, even when that's happening.
Do you feel comfortable in feeling that presence is really extremely intimate?
It's total intimacy. It's pure intimacy, because there's nothing else. It's more intimate than intimate.
What else could it be?
Presence is a point embracing itself, and all of this is that point.
It's at a point of doing breaking?
It is a point, like a mathematical point,
Okay.
embracing itself.
Okay.
And utterly collapsed.
Yeah.
And yet all of this seeming expansion is that absolute intimate engagement.
This was very helpful.
Good.
That it's more.
Yes. Well, it is. And
I mean, I'm gonna practice that when it comes up.
yeah.
When I get sad and upset.
Yeah. Yeah. Or anytime, even when it's not something that seems to be a problem.
Uh-huh.
Even whatever it is that you're focusing on, it's like, yeah, that's there, but look, there's more. Always more, always more. And more is also different. It's like different information. It's like, yeah, that story's here, but this story's here too. And it has nothing to do with it, and so is this one, and so is that. And it's just endless. So there's this openness and exclusion of just different varieties, different universes, different implications that are manifestly, explicitly present in your experience always. And because it's there, it's available if you let yourself check it out. And it's just a matter of knowing that it's there is kind of the magic key that enables you to avail yourself of it. I'm still working on that third practice.
It's gonna pop in any minute.
Your face in the mirror.
It is. It's kind of a variation on the paper one or the wall one. And it's noticing the morphing. Although with the face in the mirror, it's a little more poignant because of all the meaningful dimensions of meaning associated with it, and dimensions of self-image and reaction to self-image and self-loathing and self-love and all of these flavors being, cascading into each other.
There's a category of practices that really feel helpful, but are like the category of pretend you can do something and then do it. One time somebody had a book of mudras and you said you can make up your own mudras, like with your hands and the way you feel.
No, that's true. That's true. That's very, very useful. I mean, the way you put it is pretty adequate. If I was going to generalize that, I would say all form is meaningful in every way, and not just in one way. Any form has an infinity of meaningfulness associated with it. So you can kind of bootstrap yourself up into profound engagement just by imagining it, basically hypnotically. So you can say, the way I hold my body completely reshapes the resonance of my subtle energy. And so I just say that, and then I do it and I feel it. And it's real. It's very simple. And you're feeling subtle energies. Or I can see auras, and I can start checking out the auras. Start checking out people's auras. Things have auras too. Start checking out the auras of things. And I mean, all of this is kind of bootstrapped up by assuming it's so, pretending it's so. Basically, the simulations, it's just hypnosis is what it is. You assume that it's so, and by assuming it's so, it can be seen to be so. Because again, radiance is the ultimate Rorschach blot. It's just waiting for you to tell it what it is. It's everything and anything.
Can you help me differentiate that hypnosis? I've been thinking a lot about hypnosis because we're watching movies about cults at home. You see the culpability of the people in the situation, how they want to be hypnotized or brainwashed. And I find myself going through life sort of being culpable in all kinds of brainwashing hypnosis. But then when that kind of practice actually seems like a constructive hypnosis, whereas a lot of it is more like checking out or just letting other people.
Yeah, a lot of hypnosis is manipulative, but as a matter of fact, hypnosis, the primary, let me see, is it primary? Yeah, it is primary. The primary way the consciousness navigates itself is by hypnosis. So you sit and you think, gosh, I wonder what I had for lunch yesterday. And then all of a sudden you picture what you had for lunch. That's hypnosis. It's a hypnotic mechanism. You seed it, you pretend you can do it, and then you do it, because the nature of consciousness is it's very obliging. It wants to stimulate. Imagination wants to stimulate whatever suggestion, whatever image is given as a seed. This is a conversation. All verbal communication with people is hypnotic.
Yeah.
As soon as someone says something, you're conscious and you hear it. Your consciousness obligingly stimulates it in your imagination.
Yeah. But that's what I find. I mean, this is also another thing I want to tank, but I know it's not true, but the radiant presence seems way more vibrant to me when no one's talking, or there's no words that I understand in the language.
Right. Right.
It all seems to collapse if there's a breathing or like there's
Yeah. But that's because of the habit of orienting to speech and its importance, and as well as the reaction against that. So there's a kind of an internal polarization set up between those two things, which is kind of a reactivity, both to the presence of speech and to the absence of speech. But it's kind of an eccentricity. It's not actually like that. It's like it's some degree of a hypersensitivity that is still a reaction from the pain of being immersed in all of that all our lives. In actuality, it's all neutral, and it doesn't need to be a mutual exclusion like that. It can be seen that it's not like that, but if it seems to be like that, it's no harm, no foul. Again, you work with it for your own navigation. If you're feeling like tripping on on the other stuff, then get away from words. If that helps you, you know. But ultimately, there's no intrinsic mutual exclusion there.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to so sensitivity, I guess I was thinking sensitivity training is somehow cutting through the hypnotic trend, but it's not.
It doesn't.
Necessarily that.
It doesn't cut through it. It reveals the partiality of the hypnosis. Remember this morning we were talking about perspectives. A perspective basically generates an actuality from any particular perspective. Let's say things seem to be a certain way, and then you shift the perspective and things seem to be a different way. So hypnosis does that and is doing that. I forgot where were we going from, where were we starting from?
Sensitivity versus hypnosis, or how they.
Oh yeah, sensitivity. Yeah, sensitivity reveals the sort of the cracks between the sort of the macro hypnotic movements, because perspectives aren't actually coherent. Perspectives are, again, they're kind of innuendo. They're not a full comprehensive reality. They're sort of sketched in, and in between the sketching is outside of that perspective and outside of that innuendo of the implication. And so sensitivity, again, is kind of a bell curve thing. So, you know, the way things seem to be from different perspectives, like the result of hypnotic suggestions are like the tops of a bell curve. But sensitivity enables you to access the subtler aspects, which are also present, which deviate from the dominant flavor of what the perspective seems to be presenting. So ultimately, sensitivity does free you from hypnosis, because say there's a suggestion and your consciousness obligingly simulates it. So that's the hypnotic mechanism right there. So there's a suggestion and your consciousness simulates it. But if you have a sufficient sensitivity, as there is a suggestion and your consciousness simulates it, there's also vastly more than that that's present, which is not a simulation of that suggestion. And that becomes more felt to be true. It's more available, it's more obvious. So then even as the mechanism is enforced, it becomes a small event in a vastness, most of which is not that, so you're not entrapped by it. You're not vulnerable to it because it's not as big as it seems to be when you're less sensitive.
Yeah.
Which, you know, as we talked about earlier, I guess this morning maybe a little last night too, is the same mechanism where one discovers one's free of karma. It's not that your karma gets canceled out. You don't stop being you, but you discover through the sensitivity, you discover you're so much more than you that the fact that you're still you doesn't really matter because you're not stuck in there. It's like a very small subplot in a vast War and Peace epic. So who gives a shit? You know, it's sort of, it wins into insignificance in the overall perspective of things.
Which brings up, you said before that context is liberation.
Yeah.
And so I've been playing a lot with that, where we're looking at larger environment and taking in Gestalt or
and again,
the qualities of light, stuff like that, just all kinds of stuff that certainly normally seem outside of being.
Yeah. And again, it's not, don't make the mistake of assuming that larger is relative in a spatial sense. It's just more, you know, increased sensitivity, increased information, increased, you know, flavors. So it's not necessarily simplistically a more in any kind of a spatial or quasi-spatial sense. Although it can be that too. But I mean, this sort of, it's a little more abstract, but this sort of model of the bell curves is really pretty right on. You know, whatever seems to, whatever things seem to be a certain way, they're more than that. While still being the way they are. You know, it's very irrational because logic is based upon this or that. If it's this, it's not that. If it's that, it's not this, and this is this, and that's that. But reality is not like that. Reality is, if it's this, it's also that. If it's that, it's also this. And it's also not this. And so it's, again, it's just wide open. You know, all these ways of trying to collapse it down, trying to resolve it as being this or that. They're nowhere, they can't be found. You know, radiant presence is unresolvable.
It reminds me of where you started this weekend, Thursday night, where you said no one is really here.
Yeah.
It's just everything is presence.
Yeah. Nothing's erased. Everyone's as here as they ever were, but no one's here.
And then all the different perspectives that arise from that is presence playing with itself.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. The radiant presence is continually dancing with itself. And all of this variety, everything we're talking about today is just, you know, apparent moves in this dance. Perspectives and hypnosis and, I mean, all this stuff is just, you know, radiance is kneading itself, churning itself, dancing with itself, interpenetrating itself, exploring itself.
In that context, if we notice when hope and fear come up, acceptance and rejection,
Mm-hmm.
good and bad,
Mm-hmm.
that this is where we begin to short circuit that direct experience.
Yeah, if you buy into it as being absolutely that way, because then you're falling into belief, which is a partialization of something that is not partialized. You're holding unconsciously. You're holding that you can know what something is, and what's more than that, you do know what it is, and then you're reacting to that knowledge. And every step of that is false. You can't know what anything is, and you don't know what anything is. So why react to what you think it is that is wrong? You know, you're basically reacting to a fantasy. Mind you, it may be a fantasy that has a germ of evidence in it. It's a fantasy that's based on experience, but it's a partialized experience. So it's not a true reaction. You're not reacting to what's really there. You're reacting to a very censored version of what's there.
You know, I can't figure anything out, but what I do know is that the more I relax,
Relaxation is huge. I don't think I've actually mentioned that this retreat yet. Relaxation is huge, and not a contrived relaxation of sloppiness, you know, melting or something, but just ease, you know, just let it flow, relax, loosen up, open up. Not doing it, just sort of being it. And again, that is resonant, that is consonant with the very flavor of the intrinsic flavor of radiant presence itself. It is effortless. It is totally relaxed. It is totally uncontrived. It is totally unheld. And so, by experiencing those flavors in oneself, it's kind of priming the pump to be more in tune with the flavor of the actuality, so it resonates and it more obviously, it's less seemingly contradictory, which you know, winds us up and sends us in a tizzy.
I feel like I get really awkward with any techniques. Just trips me up.
Yeah, well, I get that, but again, techniques are tricks, and they're there to use if they're useful.
Yeah.
But they're not requirements. And the techniques aren't what they pretend to be either, because the techniques are simply a pretense that you adopt in order to discover something beyond that. The technique is like knocking on a door, but once you open the door and go through it, you're not, where you go to is not the technique. So it's a trick. It's a lot like the kind of hypnotic mechanisms that I was talking about with Jeremy, where you pretend you can do something and then just do it. Just do it. Just pretend you can do something.
Avatar.
Huh?
Being your own avatar.
Sure. Yeah, anything, And it's not that it's not bullshit, because it's bullshit. But it's bullshit. It's no more bullshit than anything. It is just another vector of actuality. And the upside of all of that is you get out of your rut, you get out of the groove of being stuck in your normalcy, which you're not really stuck in, but just by habit and cussedness, it feels like we're stuck because we keep thinking we're there all the time. And so by sort of really, smashing the wall and just bursting into a whole new space arbitrarily, not that the new space is actually an improvement on the old space, but just the fact of having the shift in itself is revealing.
The psychotropics are very powerful.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Through that.
Sure. But there's all different sorts of ways to explore that same kind of a breaking through. The sugar days you working well in here today, don't you? So Stan, tell me, we must have discussed all sorts of little quasi practices or techniques. Well, there you go. Buy Stan's book and you'll know all the techniques, all the practices.
Talk about there's like an uncomfortable feeling. You just go, like the whole just avoid it, sort of it goes away. And then there's other techniques where it looks into the feeling of the uncomfortability.
Yeah.
And eventually you see through it, and it's like, it seems like it wasn't anything in the first place. It was just like a illusion, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, when you look closely at what's actually present in any experience or any feeling or anything whatsoever, you discover that your starting point is what you think you're looking at. Say whatever, call it an uncomfortable feeling. You start off thinking it's that, but look at what's actually present that you're calling that, and just sort of relax calling it that. But look at what's actually there, and it will open, it will morph, and it will reveal more and more dimension and more richness. And eventually it gets to a point where you don't even remember what you initially thought it was, what your point of entrance is. And any and every experience is like that, not just feelings. We were talking about that earlier. Any experience opens to beyond itself, if you look at it. And that's what, the whole gazing exercise that we were talking about earlier does. You start off thinking you're looking at a wall or a blank surface or whatever, and you just be with that, and before you know it, it morphs, it changes, and all of a sudden it's something else, and then that changes, and that's something else, and that's something else, and that's something else. Because that's what experience does. it can't not do that. You can't keep that from happening. And so when you notice that that happens, then that is training in, it diminishes the tendency to hold things to be a certain way in the first place. So then, initially, say you have an uncomfortable feeling and you look at it and it morphs into something else and you go, wow, that's really amazing. And you do that a few times. Sooner or later, an uncomfortable feeling comes up and you start doubting if it's an uncomfortable feeling because you already know it's more than that, because you sort of train yourself in that it is that way. You're familiar with the fact that it is that way and it's not actually a simple thing, And emotional reactivity is always to an oversimplification. So if you're afraid of something or really wanting something, or any kind of a strong emotional reaction oriented to some condition is always the result of an oversimplifying what the condition that you're reacting to, what you're supposing it is. And it's always inaccurate because everything is more and other than you're holding it to be. And all emotional reactions are to holding something to be a certain way. And so the more you train in this, the more you notice that it is that way, the more intuitively obvious it is to you that even as these kinds of reactions come up, they're really baseless because things aren't really like that. And so that whole mechanism just diminishes in urgency and diminishes in the sort of impact it has.
There's a value of practicing that when you're not in crisis.
Yes, absolutely. It's much better to train in these kinds of things when it's easy rather than when the shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
So become expert in that seeing, and then when you really need to see it, you'll have it on call. But if the time to learn to swim is not when you fall off a boat in a hurricane, okay? You might be wise to practice in the shallow end for a while first. And then, when you fall off a boat in a hurricane, you'll be able to weather it. And this is definitely true with all these kinds of practices. Do these kinds of experiments, play with the yoga, just trip on the stuff when it's easy, when it's loose, when you're loose and easy and you have spare time and you're feeling open, and it's like, so do it when it's easy and you'll be able to do it when it's hard eventually because you build up skill, you build up chops. Just spontaneously, without any effort. It just repetition does the work, so it's very easy. It's really just sort of having fun with your experience and tripping on your experience and enjoying the interesting ins and outs of experience in a way it's a lot wilder than you're used to thinking of it, which is really fun and interesting and entertaining. So you do that, it's almost as a kind of a game, when it's easy, when you have downtime and all that. And over a period of time, you'll notice a shift, and it sort of permeates more and more of your experience of how urgent things seem to be, how important they seem to be, how threatening they seem to be, how trapped you feel like you are in circumstances, and all this stuff just spontaneously sort of opens up and diminishes in relevance. But definitely, yeah. Shallow end first, then hurricane. Not the other way around. Not wise. Another thing you'll discover is that experience is perceived multidimensionally. So you may think that you're perceiving something in a simple, direct way, but in actuality what's happening is unfathomably mysterious. And this becomes more and more obvious too. So for example, we're talking about if there's a feeling, you sort of look at the feeling. And so you say, look at the feeling, and you kind of know what that is, as if you're kind of like looking at it in some way. But what's actually happening there is very strange. And again, by experimenting with this kind of thing and doing it, you begin to participate in that strangeness and in the non-linearity and the multidimensionality of participating with experience. And again, it's not a whole lot can be said about that because it's so irrational. But you'll notice that again, we have we probably typically have a sort of a structural map or model of how experiencing happens, or perception happens, where there's there's a seer and there's a process of seeing, and then there's the object. It's not really like that, and the whole thing, again, it becomes more and more obvious that it's not like that as you begin to be with these textures. Experience is felt. All perception is really feeling. When we have these words like "I'm seeing light." Actually, the presence of light is being felt. I'm thinking thoughts. Actually, the presence of thought is being felt, and so on and so forth. Because consciousness does not have a mechanism or a vector where it reaches out a pseudopod and touches something. Consciousness perceives by being something. And again, it's very mysterious and non-linear and non-structural. This is why I like to emphasize feeling, and I like to emphasize texture, because basically all objects of perception are actually multidimensional textures, and all perception is actually feeling. So, as you go deeper into yoga and deeper into the familiarity with this experiential field, with this miraculous radiant presence, there's the active mode of it is always basically feeling textures. There's nothing else really. And you come to realize there never was anything else, even when we imposed a kind of a oversimplified structurality on our idea of how things work. But this is a very, very simple key, a very powerful key to practice, to technique. If in doubt, feel texture. And don't worry too much about what texture or how to do it or what feeling. Just feel texture. Or you can call it, if you don't like the word texture, call it flavor. Call it experiential flavor. Feel experiential flavor. Light has a flavor. Sound has a flavor. Anything and everything has a flavor. Flavor is always particularized and infinitely differentiated, and at the same time it's all one. Very strange. So that's a real kind of a master key to what to do about yoga. It's just feel texture.
Well, I'm wondering if throwing this out there, as a litmus test, if I'm engaging with sort of a feeling, if it, it's not like I go in and deconstruct it myself. I don't do that. It deconstructs itself just through the feeling, through looking.
Yeah.
That's sort of it. That it. It's just so weird. Like it reveals something outside of your. Which is really weird. It reveals something outside of how you're holding things to be.
Yeah.
Which is almost impossible. And that's impossible to do.
Well, it's actually impossible to do anything else, but yeah. Feeling a texture opens into otherness. Feeling a texture opens into otherness, always. And so, that being the case, then naturally that's the case. And anything you think you're doing like looking at an emotion or whatever, is actually feeling a texture. So of course it opens into otherness.
It just sometimes doesn't seem like it opens up into things outside of my ken.
Yeah, but that's just another structuralizing that's being held in imagination, even as the actual opening is happening. Again, it's kind of multitasking. Just because there's an imagination that it is a certain way, it can also simultaneously not being that way. It doesn't actually fall into coherence. So you don't need to worry too much. You don't need to fight with interpretations. Just because even if interpretations are happening, they aren't really powerful, and they don't actually get in the way of or impede the actual dynamism of actuality itself.
You start to relax.
Yeah. Again, it's all just the familiarity with the feeling of textures and the familiarity of this endless morphing, opening, and openness and flowing and all of that relaxes everything. It relaxes the urgency of interpretation. It relaxes the reactivity to interpretation and relaxes. I mean, all of these mechanisms that we're so familiar with, where there's this constant push and pull, in the mind and in emotions and all this stuff. It's just, all of that just sort of gets more and more ghostly. And that's the nice thing about the yoga is it works. It works without working. You don't have to do anything. Just feeling texture does it all. It's like, what's up with that? And it's not a big thing, You can be going about your business, distracted, thinking, doing the usual stuff and blah, blah, blah. And just at any random moment, just like check something out, like, oh, wow, just feel that. And then, bang, go on back, do your business. It's not this big, heavy-handed production, just a little flash of, just tuning in to something. Anyway, it's not you have to do it right or anything. It's sort of just do it. Just these little flashes, little engagements, little dances, and it is inestimably powerful in unexpected ways, and will transform your feeling tone of what this is, of what you are. But all of these things, in terms of practice or exercises, just little easy snippets. Don't force it. Don't do anything. Don't I have to do some noticing now. It's like, no, just play with it. Be light and easy. And when it moves on, move on. Let it go.
And you were saying before about under the table. It's the other side of practice ideas. It's completely a backstage job.
Yeah, totally. That's where the action is. Just these little snippets, they undermine everything.
Yeah.
It's insidious.
And going about your
conspiracy.
Really not going about your business.
Well, at first not. But you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to try and make a point of not going about your business because it's not spiritual or something. I need to be doing yoga. I can't be busy being the neurotic asshole that I am. Really? Good luck for that. I mean, you kind of get your cake and eat it too, You have to be muddling in the mire of your life and being, failing upwards or whatever, at the same time as you're achieving enlightenment. Like, how nice. No pain, no sacrifice, no struggle. Lazy man's dream.
Right.
I mean, even just, what we've been doing here, just kind of hanging out and tossing these ideas around and all that, it's inconceivably powerful. It's insidious. It's like I don't know what it's like. When it's not like you need to do anything or make anything of it or build anything up or develop any skills or you're kind of off the hook. All you have to do is enjoy. The practice is enjoyment. The practice is find enjoyable, luscious experience and just be lush, drink its lusciousness when that happens. And that's the whole shooting match. That is the entirety of the yoga right there.
Instead of trying to pin it down.
Yeah, instead of trying anything, you don't need to pin it down or build it up or anything. Just, forget about it. Forget about it and have fun.
Big open door for me was really allowing myself to really probe into never having been born, all the concepts of what that entailed.
Sure.
So that was
Yeah, I mean,
it still comes up. Look, you were never born.
yeah, I mean, there's
really real.
There's all these stories. You were born, you're gonna die.
Yeah.
It's like, what? It's a story. It's like the boogeyman. It's like,
Yeah.
where? What is this birth? What is this death? What is this being? What? What? Anything? Because if you look at the actual experience, it always deviates from the narration of it, from the model of it. The narration is, well, you were born. It's like, but look at your actual experience. There's no birth. There's no death. Nothing can be found. There's no stability. There's no instability. There's no time. There's no space. It's just this, and you can't tell what it is. It kind of looks like it might be time and space and all this other stuff, but not really. I mean, it's too weird. It's too slippery for that. It's always the same, and it's never the same. I mean, yeah.
I thought of the practice that you said is just realize you don't know what's going to happen next.
Sure, that's a nice one. Yeah, notice that whatever happens next is entirely different than what you expected. Like, imagine what you're going to be thinking in 20 seconds, and then notice that it doesn't happen. Ever. Not once. It has not happened. Yeah. Well, I was making it easy. How about nanosecond? How about a nano of a nanosecond?
What you're going to pay attention to next.
Yeah. You don't know what your eyes are going to light on. You don't know what thoughts are going to pop into your head. You don't know what feeling is going to percolate up. I mean, it's just, you're continually in a state of being surprised and amazed. Because whatever you think is going to happen, you're wrong. Period. That's a good practice. Another kind of an auxiliary to that practice is instantaneity. Really hone in on now. It's like really just pin it down. It's like, okay, when is now? Now is right here. Just do. And again, don't worry about how to do it. It's not like, well, how do you do that? Am I doing it wrong? No. Just do it. Just pretend you can do it and do it. And just now. And then see that there's nothing else. You can't really find now, and yet there's nothing else. You can't find now, but there's certainly no then. And just look at that. It's kind of obvious and very available and very trippy and sort of fun to play with. And it's a nicely destabilizing practice right there. Your history will disappear up its own ass instantly. Well, why don't we knock off? I feel that I'm dizzy enough.